So you're all really welcome to come to the IIEA. So the IIEA has been around for 30 years, informing Irish public policy in all things international affairs. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Cian Fitzgerald. I'm a senior researcher here at the IIEA. I specialize in security and defense policy. Primarily, I'm quite interested in all things hybrid warfare, so things ranging from cyber attacks to disinformation to recent drone incidents. And so I'm delighted today to welcome Oleksandr Kraiev. So Oleksandr is the director of the North America program at the Foreign Policy Council at Ukrainian Prism. He's a senior lecturer at the National University Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, and he's also a host at Apostrophe TV. So what we're going to do today is Oleksandr's going to talk a little bit about, Oleksandr's going to speak to us for about 10 minutes, and then we'll go to the Q&A, and I'm really going to try and facilitate a conversation with you. So while Oleksandr's talking, please think of questions. Please think about all the things that you want to know about what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening with European security, what's happening with the transatlantic alliance, because I really, really want to hear your perspectives on this. So Oleksandr, I'm going to turn to you, and I'm going to let you speak. And at any point at all, please feel free to also ask questions of our audience, because I know you're an academic as well, so you might have some questions for them.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for inviting me. Good evening, everybody. I do believe for me it's quite a luxurious place now to talk to you because currently 90% of my neighborhood is in the dark. Probably you can tell from the outside windows. Fortunately, my office is on the same power line as the Ministry of Interior Affairs of Ukraine. So we have the heating, we have everything necessary. But apart from that, I'm very glad to be here with you today. And, it's a common curse for any political science being in the midst of the conundrum, in the midst of something historical happening, because you're always not only an researcher, an analyst on your specific subject, you're also some way or another an analyst on everything going around. So to a bigger extent, I now can analyze some different types of ecoflows, some different types of drones, different types of hybrid attacks and informational attacks, which is also a part of my portfolio for the last several years. So yeah, I can talk basically on everything surrounding these questions. But what is, from my perspective, the most important, what I can bring to you as a Ukrainian analyst, is I do believe the Ukrainian approach to the general situation going on and on about us and about Russian aggression against Ukraine. Because our viewpoint is totally different from the Western one, although we're totally supportive of all the initiatives and all the activities that is done to support us. Of course, we do have our own considerations in hand. We do have our own views, and I do believe that is something that is not that much represented in the media, not only the Western one, but Ukrainian one as well. So I do believe I can start with that. And of course, if you are interested in something more general, more daily, I can answer that as well, because well, the daily situation nowadays is even much more different from 2022, when we were digging trenches on the outskirts of Kiev, even in my neighborhood. And now we have the totally different chaotic panopticon going all around, but that's the whole another topic. So, considering the general situation from our point of view, we are still getting nowhere. To cut a long story short, well, basically that can be my whole intro right here. We're still in the position when we're trying to suggest to the Americans and to all the others who are trying to be a part of the negotiation process, that negotiation process is a must. Because the main barrier, the main stone that is prohibiting us from going that way is, of course, Russian position. And the Russian position is quite obvious. The diplomacy right there is an additional supportive ledger in case the military part or the economic part falls apart. I'm sorry for the tautology, but generally speaking, we saw the same thing in 2014, 2015, and 16. Only at the moment when the Russians were not able or not willing at that moment in time to continue on the advancement or to continue on their general policies, and especially their wartime strategy, only at that time we did have some successes or some specific developments in the diplomatic field of issues. And currently, we do see that although the losses are amounting for the Russian army, although they are still in a kind of a tricky economic situation, they still do believe that the military success is possible, and that is why diplomatic benefits for them are of the second grade importance. Why is it so? Why do we perceive the situation in that way, and why can we not trust the Russian diplomacy as a whole? The main reason being is that they did not change their demands or cave to any kind of a compromise as of now. Yes, they are quite silent on the issue of NATO, although they are still officially denying the possibility of Ukrainian membership. Yes, they are not pushing on the issue of halving the Ukrainian army, although they did not restrain themselves from such a proposal. Yes, they're not talking about the official status for Russian language and Russian church in Ukraine, although their propaganda channels are still very vocal on that. But they still did not make any amendments to the position on the territories. And that is basically the main issue here. They want us to de jure recognize the loss of the territories, while Ukraine is ready to do it de facto. What is the difference right here? Well, you can see the Crimean example. Still, Ukraine and all the adequate nations of the world, we together did not recognize that Crimea is a part of Russia. Crimea is a temporarily occupied part of Ukraine, controlled by Russian Federation. And the same should apply for the currently temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. And basically, that's the main point of problem here. The Russians are still not considering even the slightest compromise on that regard. Why? Because they're still quite assured that they can win the necessary compromise by force. And so that is why I started with my first point, that we are still in the same place. We are still where we started, with just trying to convince the Americans that, well, Patriot missiles, Tomahawk missiles are still kind of a good idea, especially if we consider peace through strength approach, which is still, according to Zelensky, Budanov, and everybody else, is a cornerstone for Ukrainian diplomacy. The second main point here is, although the situation is quite dire, with all the electricity coming out, with all the heating problems, with the running water problems, the recent Ukrainian sociological researchers, especially by Ukrainian centers like Razumkov or Kyiv International Center for Sociological Study, they suggest that these attacks, especially during the last 2 months, did not improve the Russian positions in the negotiation. So basically, they only changed the attitude of Ukrainians toward negotiation by an error margin. No more than 2.5% of Ukrainians were convinced by Russian strikes that negotiations at any price is a viable option for Ukraine. So basically, it is that moment when you should diversify between the informational noise and basically white noise surrounding the problem and the problem itself. Because it's not the first time we have such level of problems. Yeah, as of now, the chaos is just at a dramatic level of chaoticness. Sorry for that. But generally speaking, there is nothing that changes the general dynamics. There is nothing that changes the general appreciation of the situation. Well, for example, we still have all the restaurants, all the coffee shops, all the big trade centers, and even the cinemas and everything running. So basically, it's just about your time management. When you should get home by the curfew hour, when you should know the accessible hours for each and every business you should attend today, and you should just create another schedule. That's it. It's something that we Ukrainians call the comfortable anxiousness of being Ukrainian, because we, as I told Kian, by the way, in Milan, when we met for the first time, I told that we have the most comfortable chaos in the world, because we have a plethora of different apps for air alerts, for electricity curfew, for military curfew. We have all the documents presented online. We have all the accesses for different ringtones for your alert. You can make it in the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi. You can make it in the voice of Luke Skywalker. You can make it with Ukrainian folk songs, with Ukrainian anthem. Whatever you need is there. So basically, there is nothing special about. I know it sounds kind of self-enlarging, self-invigorating, but there is nothing special about it, just living through it. It's just about adapting and making your schedule work. That's it. So basically, as of now, this type of informational propaganda machine doesn't work. And my third and very short point, and I think I'll stop there because I see I'm on my 9th minute as of now. The third point is that we do believe still, not only the expert society, but also decision makers and the general population, that European states should and can play a bigger part there, not just by providing more weapons or just being bilaterally more active. It is a very important part of Ukrainian diplomatic stance to make European countries, both EU countries and even non-EU countries, a part of the negotiation process. Not because we are self-assured that Europeans will support each and every initiative of Ukraine, but just because we perceive Russian aggression against Ukraine as a part of European security. And how can European security be discussed without Europeans being present at the table? So basically, that's one of the points, by the way, according to some of the sources that I have, that's one of the points where we have a very big disagreement with the Americans. And why, for example, Driscoll, who was in Kyiv several months ago, was very furious, not at the office of the president, but at the Ukrainian Ministry for Foreign Affairs, because that's the main point of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, not the office of president, to get Europeans to the table at any occasion possible. So basically, that's something that should be done from both sides. We do see a lot of activity. We are very appreciative and thankful for all the help, but we do believe that a little bit more of geopolitics, a little bit more of the harsh attempt on United States, on all the other issues, is something that is necessary. And let me congratulate the whole European community with a nearly decisive victory on Greenland, at least for that time. So basically, we need more of this. We need more of the good old style, harsh diplomacy, even on the ally side. And that is something that we could promote, when we can stand for, and that is something that we basically wait for in everything, even in our EU accession. We are ready for harsh negotiation. Well, you see the polls, you see all of our neighbors, just a bunch of very hard negotiators. But we are ready for that. We do understand the problems there. And it's a good Ukrainian saying that our neighbors are our best friends and best enemies. So basically, it is better to know what the problems are than just to be silent on the main issues. So I'll stop there, and I'm more than grateful for any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Oleksandr. That was absolutely mesmerizing. I'm aware that we've limited time, so I don't want to hijack this, because I can just text you any questions that I have. So do we have any people who'd like to ask Oleksandr a question now? I can see one there, I can see one in the front. Let's go with two questions for the time being. So the gentleman back here, and then the gentleman up here in the front.
Hi Alex, thanks for speaking to us.
Just in the microphone so we can hear you.
Hi Alex, thanks for speaking to us. I'm just curious how tensions between the US and the EU have been perceived on the Ukrainian side over the last few weeks.
Great question. There's one in the front here.
Thanks.
Hi, Alex. Thank you very much. I'm Dimitri from the Embassy of Belgium. Thank you very much for being here today. I just had one quick question regarding, well, what Zelensky said at Davos the other day. Well, apparently our efforts are a bit too slow, not united enough. What would Ukraine like to see from the European side? What kind of posture do you want Europe to have, and what kind of support could be expected, is expected from the Ukrainian side? Thank you.
Whoa, that's two good questions, very profound ones. Well, let's start with the first one. I think it's a lot to do about Ukrainian appreciation and understanding of Trump, basically, because during the election, and me as an American analyst, American-leaning analyst, I had a lot of work there. basically speaking, the Ukrainian public was divided on Trump-Biden issue and then Trump-Harris issues. Because yes, Biden was perceived as a great friend of Ukraine, but very cautious, very anxious, very unwilling one. So, by the way, Jake Sullivan is hated in Ukraine, like wholeheartedly with the whole Ukrainian soul. He's hated for his controlled escalation agenda and his doctrine, because that was the one that provided for a lot of Ukrainian casualties during the 2022 Kharkiv operation and 2022 Kherson operation, because we lacked intelligence, we lacked sufficient munition, we lacked sufficient support, while the Russians just want some time to prepare the defense lines. So the attitude towards Biden presidency was a mixed one. So we do understand all the support, but we also saw a lot of flaws there. And that is why Trump at November 2024 was perceived also mixed and nearly at the half, 50-50. 50% believed it will be a tragedy for Ukraine if Trump will be elected, because still in Ukraine he is perceived as Putin's friend. He is perceived as a, well, we call it in German Putin Versteiner, somebody who understands Putin. So that was a problem. But the other half perceived as like, well, who can be worse than anxious and unwilling Biden? Well, maybe Trump will be chaotic, but chaotic against Russia as well. So maybe we can use that. We can point him towards Russia and he'll do something. So, you know, it's, well, you should understand a lot about the psychology of people living through war, because it's a kind of very cynical, sometimes humorous, but at the same time very cynical approach to life. Well, what can get worse in that situation? So let's try something new. It will not be as bad as it is now. And now, when we saw what Trump can do during his second term, when we saw all the differences of the second term compared to the first one, now that he has all the yes men around him, less and less professionals, more and more self-inflicted policies, more and more l'état c'est moi approach in that regard, we do see that Trump is becoming very dangerous. But at the same time, once again, being very practical and cynical here, we cannot abstain from good relations with the United States. Although in 2022, United States provided 71% of all the military equipment for Ukraine. In 2025, we only needed 20% of everything from the United States. More than 45% is provided by the European nations. Everything else is created and manufactured in Ukraine. So basically, we were able to foster our own military production. But still, United States is about anti-rocket defense, Patriot missile systems, for example. United States is about high tech for our militaries, especially communication. And of course, United States is about intelligence, which we do see that Macron and Merz wants to also substitute that, but they're still not in a position to substitute the American intelligence. So we do understand that Trump is, let's put it mildly, problematic one. But in that regard, we're totally on the side of the Europeans. Well, that's the general understanding from the Office of President, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We do totally support Europeans. And it's also a common joke among the population that we were even voting in our chats which specific brigade or which specific battalion of Ukrainian armed forces will protect Greenland the best. For example, the Chernihiv's 13th Brigade, or for example, the 100th Steel Brigade from Volyn, because those are the guys from the northern part of Ukraine. They're quite accommodated for northern climate, so maybe they will be best than the 15 guys from Germany and 10 guys from France, 1 guy from Britain. So basically, we are joking about it, but generally speaking, if we say about Trump versus European Union, Europe, whatever you call it, we do support Europe, but we also cannot be a direct enemy or perceived as a direct enemy of Trump. Unfortunately, we are in a position when we should, the first president of Ukraine called it moving between the paddles during the rain. So basically, we are moving between the raindrops. We are trying to mingle in between all the positions. Unfortunately, it's something we should do in a position we are. Well, and the second one, I'm sorry, I got just too excited with the first one. What was the second question?
Can we give Dimitri back the microphone? Thanks so much.
Yeah, my question was about the expectations of the Ukrainian development.
Expectation. Well, to put it short, we expect the coalition of the willing to be first the coalition and second of the willing, not the coalition of the personal subjective interest of specific countries, and not the coalition when we have a lot of talk in the talk, but not enough walk in the walk. Yes, we do see a lot of great initiatives there, but most of them are done bilaterally. So basically, the coalition of the willing just became a forum for a great political discussion with the absence of the good business talks. For example, it is believed that the best times of when the international coalition helped Ukraine was during the middle of the Ramstein, well, the middle of the existence of the Ramstein Forum. Why? Because the US was still there. The US was still providing a big chunk of everything. But the most important part, we have a good communication between the CEO and COO of the biggest military industrial complex producers of all the Western powers. So basically, it was not only about the great political talk, it was about spreadsheets, it was about resources, it was about logistics. And as you know, practitioners talk about logistics and professionals talk about logistics. And well, everybody else are talking about tactics and strategy, but we should talk about how to get the necessary amount of equipment to the necessary amount of units. So it's basically about being more proactive and being more practical, because we do understand that you are on our side. We're very grateful for that. We're very grateful for all the support that we have. But in many instances, we do see that this support lacks this cohesion. It lacks this unilateralism when we speak about the goals, when we speak about the structure, and especially given the election years of 2024, 2025, given with all the new politicians in Europe and a lot of, unfortunately, populists, both right and left, taking the reins of power, we do understand the situation. But still, we do believe that our European partners, especially the bigger ones, can play this unifying role in making the coalition work. So it's basically nothing new. It's nothing additional. It's just doing what is proclaimed to be done.
Just a very small question of mine, just because, Oleksandr, you and I have talked about the kind of the costs of that managed escalation decision by Jake Sullivan. And I think we're generally in agreement that it led to a lot of unnecessary casualties and possibly also stalled a lot of Ukrainian successes in 2022 and gave Russia time to dig in. I think really my question is, I know we spoke with the American managed escalation, but there was certainly a lot of caution on the European side as well. In terms of, there was that conversation about, we wouldn't give tracked tanks, but we could give, wheeled vehicles. And there was all these kind of weird kind of mental gymnastics to try and make it somehow work. I'm curious in your thoughts about this now for the Europeans as a partner being still too cautious. There's conversations around the Taurus missiles, deep precision strikes, about maybe needing to rely on a more chaotic America if Europe is being too cautious. And then I'm also quite interested in your perspective on, I know we talk about the Europeans, but also the role of the United Kingdom, because the United Kingdom has shown quite a lot of leadership in support for Ukraine, especially under when Ben Wallace was Minister for Defense in the UK. So I'm just a little bit curious in terms of your thinking on Europe's caution, and I think also adaptation of managed escalation in the same way, and just your thoughts about that.
Well, once again, a very practical answer here. Yes, indeed, Europe is caution, and it is perceived by a lot of Ukrainians, especially if we speak about the general population, as a flaw of the, we call it the Bürgerisch Europe approach to life. But at the same time, you never ceased to support us. You never ceased the intelligence exchange. You never ceased the military and financial support of Ukraine. By the way, it is considered one of the biggest Ukrainian successes that our central bank and our banking system is the only one of the countries involved in the full-fledged war since World War II, when the banking system did not fail and did not devalue during the full-scale invasion. So it is mostly because of the European support. So yes, the support is cautious. Yes, the support can be better, but it is consistent, and it is the biggest and the brightest part of this support. So the Europeans are being consistent, although cautious. and the Americans are being chaotic, although not consistent. Well, that's a part of being chaotic, of course. So we cannot fully rely on the Americans in that exact scenario because of this inconsistency and because of, well, Trump's approach to diplomacy. Because the main, I should not call it fear, but the main anxiety alert as of now in Ukraine is that Trump will have the same approach towards Ukraine as he had towards, for example, Rwanda and Congo, and the same he had towards Thailand and Cambodia, the same he had towards Israel and Hamas. Basically, when he creates some kind of a working negotiation framework, when they had a signature of a ceasefire agreement, then Trump's put a new crown on his head and he is very happy with the result. 2 weeks after the ceasefire is broken, we have fighting once again, but Trump's cannot be bothered less. Well, because he has already conducted the deal. He is already a great diplomat. He is already a great guy. So basically, we are kind of waiting for this moment in our situation when the some kind of a deal. By the way, we do not accept any peace deal. So peace deal for Ukraine is unimaginable as of now, unfortunately. We only speak about ceasefire agreement. And also the main question, for example, for our military analysts is when we have ceasefire agreement, when will the next invasion be? In 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. So basically it's about understanding the reality that Russia is still here and they still have the same ambitions as before. So even with this ceasefire agreement, we are kind of understanding that the moment it will be signed, the Americans will be off, unfortunately. It's a very distinct possibility. But the Europeans, well, not only because you love us, but not only because we are so fluffy, white, and good, but because it's your own security. And that is why we do understand that being with cautious Europeans is kind of the more strategic approach than being with the chaotic Americans in that regard.
Do we have any more questions, actually? Wow, there's a lot, actually. So we might go to this lady in the front, and then also this other gentleman in the front as well.
Hello, my name is Daria. I'm also from Ukraine, and you've probably noticed that during the World Economic Forum, a lot of attention has been dedicated to the issue of Greenland and Trump's kind of claims over it, obviously unwanted, unsubstantiated, and it kind of brings up the issue of European security once again. And I was just thinking it in terms of kind of European fragmentation when it comes to issues. Say there's obviously the war in Ukraine, and then there's Trump toying around with Greenland and making atrocious claims about it. And I kind of see it as a whole system of the European security. And I wanted to ask you, would you consider kind of this accumulation of crisis around Europe be a kind of push for Europe to be more proactive, more strategic, and not as cautious? Because maybe you can be cautious with Biden, maybe you can be a little bit more lenient with Biden, but not with Trump, where he constantly undermines Europe, let's say bullies it. And would you consider there's a possibility for the Europeans to kind of come together more, not even the EU, but Europe as a whole continent?
Just one more question. We're just going to do 2 questions. I'm sorry about this, Oleksandr. Just gentleman there.
Hi, Alexander. Thank you for coming in today. My name is Dikpo. When you were doing your introduction, you said that the average Ukrainian's position in this is not being represented well in international media and local media. Did you say that? If you did, I understand that Ukrainians can't control international media, but can you speak more as to why, the Ukrainian position is not being represented well within Ukraine, in the media in Ukraine?
Thanks so much, Deepo.
Okay, so as for the first question, the short answer is yes. And the long answer is it's inevitable that Europeans should do it. It's like, the main principle of academic writing is publish or perish. But for Europeans right now, it's arm or perish. Not because you should be warmongering, Trumpian kind of European, but you should be and old-fashioned kind of European, when sic pacem parabellum. If you want peace, you should be ready for war. And only a strong stance will be sufficient enough for Europe to be ready for all the cataclysms and catastrophes that are unfolding. Because basically, we're speaking about the absence of the world order as of now. And I do not believe in history being repetitive. I believe in history being a kind of a poem. It rhymes every once in a while. It rhymes in between the lines. And basically, we're currently rhyming with one of the worst periods of European history. And if we see the poem some lines upwards, we'll see that each and every time the states that were not ready for the worst case scenario were the first to fall. And basically, this idea is something that should be the main part of the narrative and the main part of informational agenda. But for example, Germany should not rearm because Merz or Minister of Defense said so. Germany should rearm in order to stay Germany, be it political, be it societal, economical, whatever. France should create more U-boats and create more aircraft carriers, not because it's good for the economy, but because it's good for the France. And it's good for the French people, and it's good for keeping Russians at bay, and possibly Chinese at bay. By the way, why not? Why not see it in a global scale, not only for European borders and continents, but globally? Because basically Russia, if to put it in very cynical terms, is conducting an experiment on Ukraine for China. Basically, China can make a lot of assumptions and make a lot of conclusions concerning the Western unanimity, Western power, Western readiness when it comes to Taiwan, just by watching what is happening and what's going on with Ukraine. They can make the same assumptions, for example, on Africa. Well, if the Europeans cannot support their borders, how will they be able to support the nations, the partner nations in other regions? How they will be able to facilitate and foster their geopolitics if they cannot even conduct their own border politics. So basically, it's not about willingness or unwillingness to be ready for the cataclysm. It's about just, being ready for anything that is coming. One way or another, something bad can happen. And the Murphy Law teaches us if something bad can happen, it will happen. Basically, that's something that happened with Ukraine during the last 11 years. If something bad could have happened with us, it have already happened with us. By the way, it's another common joke in Ukraine when we say, well, we should not provoke, we should not escalate. The other person should answer, what's the worst will happen? They will attack once again during the attack. So basically, that's the whole idea here. That's the idea that, unfortunately, Russia opened a Pandora box. Russia destroyed international law and international rules of the political game as it is, and we are currently in this metaphysics of international relations when the rules amount to nothing, and starting from this nothingness, we are jumping into the abyss of emptiness and trying to create something while flying into nothing. And basically, that's where we are right now. And I do believe that's the moment when you should buy a parachute and not thinking about whether it's a good idea, a good investment to buy a parachute, whether all the electoral groups will support buying the parachute, and whether the parachute should be pink or blue or green. You need to get a goddamn parachute one way or another, or otherwise the abyss will just swallow all of us. And considering the second question, the main problem here is that, well, if we speak about Ukrainian media, of course, all the information is very much available. As I said, we have a very good informational system, but still we do see, I think it will be interesting from the hybrid side of issues, we still do see a lot of hybrid influence coming not only from Russia, but even coming from some of the political parties in Ukraine. For example, unfortunately for us, for more than 1.5 years already, there are a lot of talks about elections. There are a lot of talks about getting ready for elections. For example, all of my guys who I know from the political consulting business, they have already signed up and prepared contracts for like a year in advance, because all the political agents are getting ready for these fucked up elections. which are impossible to conduct during wartime, and they are even not possible to start election process in the first 6 months after the end of the martial law. But still, everybody is getting ready, and this is why we see a lot of inner political. It's not infighting per se. It's mostly intrigue setting. Propaganda-ish playing. For example, haha, we know that this guy was in a kind of a corrupt scandal this way or another. This guy was supporting pro-Russian agenda before the full-scale invasion. This guy was in that party and that and that and that. So we see a lot of this inner fighting going on, and that is not something good when we speak about the informational unity of the population. And of course, a lot of like general disinformation. For example, we have several protests and roadblocks in some of Ukrainian cities, even in Kyiv, in some of the districts, because people do believe that city mayor is sitting at his table with a lot of buttons and levers and just putting, okay, let's block electricity for that district and open electricity for that district. So unfortunately, this kind of a blunt hybrid informational weapons are still being used against us, all in Russian language, by the way, all of them. So there is not a one material in a proper literature level Ukrainian language concerning the power outages, concerning the water supply, concerning heating. All of them, like 97%, are in Russian, and sometimes in a very bad Ukrainian-ish slash with Russian words and everything. We call it surjik in Ukraine, so it's a very bad surjik. But they're trying to use this situation with societal, not unrest, but societal unease with the situation. And unfortunately, all of the situation are resolved peacefully, even without the police involving. Just our district representatives and mayors, they just come to people and say, what the hell is going on? Tell me what is wrong with you. How can you not comprehend the basic law of physics? Or how the current is going through the cables, or how the water supply is working. So basically, we have a very good school level physics lesson for the whole Ukraine as of now. We have special YouTube channels starting right now on the basics of water supply for high-story buildings in Kyiv. So that's a very interesting approach to that. But generally speaking, the main problem is that our informational agenda is overflown with unnecessary informational junk, which is used by the players both inside Ukraine and outside Ukraine. And that is unfortunately the case. And for international media, well, the answer is simple. We are not hype. We are not hype right now because Greenland is hype, because Middle East is hype, everything. It's normal. It's okay. This has been going on for 4 years already, but that's something that we are battling. And for example, I am battling this right now, but yeah, that's something that should be awaited, but that's also considered a problem right here.
Do you have any more questions coming in? Oh, wow. Okay, we've loads. I'm going to try and take 3. Oleksandr, can you take 3 questions at one time? Is that all right? Okay. Hands back up again. I'm so sorry, guys. Okay, there's a gentleman there, and then there's a gentleman there, and then we'll do the gentleman over there.
Hello, hi. My name is Gianmarco, and before you were saying that Europe should be sitting at the table of the negotiation, and I was wondering what's the role that you see for Europe at that table, that can play at the table, how we can make a difference, considering that Putin's been very clear about the fact that like he doesn't want us at the table. Trump also wasn't like very welcoming us, not to mention the fact that like we take long time to reach a decision, and sometimes, you know, we have to kick somebody out of the room to actually. Thank you.
Gentleman over there.
All right. Thank you very much. My name is Afonso, and something I'm curious about is that with all the coming of a new world order where the United States aren't really the protectors of the free world, and Europe is highly unstable right now, if it's within the plans of Ukraine to consider and try and look for alliances and partnerships somewhere else in the world, so in other continents besides Europe and the United States?
Thanks so much. And the gentleman in the green jumper.
Hi, Alex. Thank you for speaking to us again. My name's Asin. So, in your own words, the good old-fashioned diplomacy, does that still work in regards to negotiations and solving the issue, which I feel can also be categorized into like a deep-rooted ideological belief that Ukraine belongs to Russia? And secondly, also considering the fact that there's always been a concern of the lack of trust and legitimacy of Vladimir Putin in regards to upholding agreements. Even if there was a peace deal, do you think it's fair for us to expect it to hold, given the failures in the past? And or have there been like different viable options that you think are much more suitable? Thank you.
So what we have, Oleksandr, is we have the role of Europe in Ukraine in Ukrainian ceasefire negotiations. We have possible partners other than the US and Europeans, and does diplomacy still work?
Well, answering the first question is somehow also coinciding with answering the third one. So once again, I'm that guy who wants to give a short answer, but never constrains himself with giving a long answer. So the short answer is you should be more fuck around and find out in that regard. So what is the role of Europe? Just get there. Just do what you want, what you seem desirable and necessary. Do what is necessary and you'll find out. Yeah, it is risky. But for example, this is what Kian was talking about when he said about British leadership. How is British leadership, for example, perceived in Ukraine? Why was it important? Because they didn't care about the repercussions. Well, they did care. But basically, they were still getting us the necessary supply. They were getting us the necessary supply while everybody else was like, well, we should wait, we should see. Kyiv will fall in 3 days. I was at that time in Kyiv and I'm like, okay, let's speak about that. I have a lot of broadcasts from, by the way, from the UK, from the Middle East at that time. And one of the questions was, well, the Russians are near the Kyiv border. How do you see in how many hours will they be near the central building? The probable answer is never. And I was right about it. So basically, the main objective for Europeans at this negotiation is to be a player, not to be somebody who is just getting into the group like your younger siblings that your mother forced you to get with your friends to a party. You should be a full-fledged player who has a geopolitical interest, a view of the world order. That's one of the parameters for being a geopolitical player, and somebody who can make decisions. So basically, you don't want Russia at your borders or attacking your cities. Okay, let's establish a common anti-air and anti-missile defense system. You don't want Russia to break a ceasefire agreement. Okay, let's think about a common mission. Maybe a peacekeeping mission, maybe a monitor mission. But what is most important, let's make some agreement on what will come after the breach of the deal. And by the way, that's the answer for the third question. Yes, we cannot trust Russians. We will never trust Russians. That's something that is obvious. But how can we play this out? Well, we should sign some kind of a ceasefire agreement because otherwise we cannot speak about any further diplomacy. But any diplomacy will work if we will have leverages of monitor and control. So, for example, if they violate a ceasefire regime, what will come next? Assurances, condolences, and a very deep regret about the situation. Then they violate it again. And then they violate it again and again. So basically, it is about creating our common European vision of what this security should be like. So the role of the Europeans is just like the role of the Americans or role of any other geopolitical player. You are there to represent yourself, to vouch for your interest, for your security, and just do not forget that Ukrainian security is a part of European security, because if Ukraine fail, well, that's your problem then. It's not our problem at that time. So basically, it's about our common idea of the rules of this world order, of the security parameters, and of the repercussions for violation of the security parameters. So I do believe that's what they call old-fashioned diplomacy. When you are not constrained by the formalities, not constrained by the not trying to offend anybody, especially the aggressor on the other side of the table. You're just fighting for your national and bloc and alliances interests, and you're trying to protect yourself and your buddies and your allies from any possible harm. So that's the way it should be from our perspective. And that's the role that Europe can play. It's just about Europe is perceived in Ukraine, to put it poetically, as a sleeping giant. So basically, you have more population, even to speak in terms of 19th century warfare. If we get a bayonet to every European and a bayonet to every Russian, you will still win like heads up in any given scenario. So basically, you are much more powerful than you can imagine. It's just only about political will and determination. So it may sound like a Churchillian type of talk, but we live in a Churchillian type of times, unfortunately, and that's the time for such talks. So that's for the first and the third question. And the second, so the first, the second.
Europe and the US. Potential partners other than Europe and the United States.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting because before the war in 2020, well, I work for the Ukrainian Prism. We are a think tank which is mostly working with Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, Verkhovna Rada, Ukrainian Parliament. So we are mostly consulting them on specific decisions. And we were asked to help them with creating the so-called grand strategy of small alliances. Even before full-scale invasion, we tried to implement the strategy of creating a number of small alliances within Europe in order to facilitate and to create these small clubs of support for Ukraine on our Euro-Atlantic integration. So it was Lublin Triangle, Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland. It was Kyiv, Chisinau, Bucuresti, Odessa Triangle. It was London, Warsaw, Kiev, the one that did not implement itself, but still perceived as the most popular one in Ukrainian media. But unfortunately, with the full-scale invasion, these formats did not was not fully implemented, basically. The other idea was that Ukraine should be more represented in the non-Western part of the world, basically. And so during 2022-2023, we helped the MFA with creating Latin America strategy of Ukrainian diplomacy, African strategy of Ukrainian diplomacy, and even in 2020, we created together with our diplomats the Asian strategy for Ukrainian diplomacy. And it entails opening more embassies, conducting more people-to-people diplomacy, more academic exchanges. So starting from the ground up. Why starting from the ground up? Just a small example. Our embassy in Mexico City works for 7 countries of Central Latin America, and there are only 7 people working at the embassy. Or for example, if we speak about our embassy in Brazil, this embassy have only 4 guys in the staff, and it's working for 6 countries in the region. Or for example, Africa. Before 2025, we only have 5 permanent embassies in Africa, and only 1 of them has more than 3 personnel. So that's the problem. We are not there. We are not visible. We are not represented. So with all the non-European allies and partners, we are still working on that. That's for sure. The main successes are, of course, Japan and South Korea, who provided us, well, discreetly, but provided us with munition, provided us with humanitarian support, with a lot of other support. And for example, from my point of view, just in front of me, we have a big stage in our office when we have all the receptions and all the speakers. Just right there was the previous ambassador of Japan to Ukraine, and he said a very great quote. He said that basically Japan and Ukraine are very close and closely related nations because we have only one country in between us, one very big and problematic, but still only one country. So basically that's the idea for Ukraine, for us to be visible. And at least we get away from this typical stupid question, oh, Ukraine, it's somewhere near Russia. Oh.
I might turn back to the audience. Do we have any more questions? Just we've got one lady there, we've got one gentleman in the front, and we've got another gentleman over here. Just a little bit further up, the lady with the blonde hair.
Hi, I have a hypothetical question for you. I know it's kind of impossible to answer, but if Ukraine should accede to the European Union, which has been quite accelerated, how do you think that that would impact the situation in Ukraine?
And then the gentleman at the front.
Hi, Alex. You've talked a lot about the chaos in the States at the moment and the Trump administration and the advantages and disadvantages that come with it. I just want to know, what is the Ukrainian opinion on this new board of peace that's being established at the moment? And will it be taken in any sort of seriousness in a Ukrainian negotiation on a peace deal or even other deals?
Then just Brian over there.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for the talk so far. I'm just curious in terms of relations with Europe. I mean, how confident would Ukraine feel next 2 or 3 years in terms of having stable European partners, given the fact that it looks like far-right parties in both the UK and France are going to win the elections? And does this create a problem for Ukraine in that Europe might become more chaotic, maybe a bit more Trumpian than what's been expected to date? Thanks.
Great. Oleksandr, over to you.
Okay, so let's start from the first one. What will happen to Ukraine when we accede to European Union? It will be a disaster, but a necessary one, because our societal institutions are half ready for that. By the way, if you're interested, we have this accession monitor. It is created by New Europe Center in Ukraine. They are very good partners of ours. It is also available in English, if I'm not mistaken. So they just monitor by every specific category and every specific accession parameter how the Ukraine is moving towards it. And basically, according to their estimate and according to European Commission estimate, we are there by like 70, 75-ish%. But this 25%, that's about judicial systems, that's about anti-corruption systems, that's about trade relations, that's about business practices, and because business standards, business codification, etc., etc. So it will be disastrous. It will be very hard. It will be crisis-like. But you know, taking a vaccine is also crisis-like. It's also a disaster for the organism because you're taking something that will disturb your system, make you have a fever, make you have some kind of problem, but then you'll appear much more resilient, much stronger, and much more adaptable. So it is perceived by the supporters, and that's the vast majority of Ukrainian population, as a very needed and a very necessary development in our history, although a very hard one because of all the reforms that I mentioned. And even by those who are not sure about European accession and does not support European Union, they perceive it to be unavoidable. So we can call it a Ukrainian consensus in a very big regard there. So in this case, I do believe that, yeah, it's hard, but we have come a long way. And just like in Game of Thrones, why do you think I come all that way? Just to ascend the European Union. That's it. We have nothing. We have a lot to lose, and we have a lot to attain. So we must do it only in that terms. Then Board of Peace. Well, just like in that Disney song, we don't talk about Bruno. We don't talk about Board of Peace because we don't see a reason, no obvious necessary reason, except for Trump getting the payments. Because basically, just to be on the board, it costs, what, $1 billion or something like that, with Trump being a for-life president without any additional elections and disregarding whether he is the president of the United States still, etc., etc. So we don't see anything from it apart from something like a small Mason-like club just for the grown-up boys to talk about big politics and to feel themselves exceptional and just to flood money towards Trump. By the way, the only thing that we spotted to be more like a practical side of Board of Peace is that Russians devised a very good plan how to use it. The second day of the existence of this Board of Peace, they proposed to funnel all the frozen assets of Russia that are in Europe and in the United States through the Board of Peace, just to support the global peace process, restoration of Gaza, etc., etc. So this just perceived to be a very big funneling instrument for some. I do not want to be very radical on that, but it seems to me to be this instrument of a big international corruption. Otherwise, I don't see any practical implementation for it whatsoever. And about the Trumpian and basically, let's call it populist resurgence in European states and generally in democracies. Unfortunately, that's something that happened during crises. Populists provide short and very decisive answer to a very complicated and strong issues, and that is why they're popular, because you should not think, you should not do anything about it. There is a big guy, a big strong man that will deal with everything. These paternal complexes of democratic societies, unfortunately, are very much likable by the populists like Trump or Babiš or Orban or Fico. By the way, you see, nearly half of the surnames that I'm mentioning are from our region, from Central and Eastern Europe. So we have a very close contact with those fuckheads. And unfortunately, that's something that is a part of the general process. The only thing we see here is just to get the same instruments we had with the Americans, just to have them interested in practical things. Trump got interested in Ukraine after the rare earth mineral deal. That's the only thing he cited when he was speaking about Ukraine aboard of Air Force One. He said that I will return all the money that Biden wasted on that. So the same comes for Fico in Slovakia, because Fico was like, nothing will go to Ukraine after my premiership. I will do everything in my power to abstain from this bloody war. And on the 13th day of his premiership, he resigned and renewed all the military contracts of national companies in Slovakia for Ukrainian defense. Why? Because there are a lot of money here and there are a lot of investment opportunities. So basically, populists cannot be populist without sufficient funds. And we can provide the opportunity for them to earn. At the same time, having our own benefits with weapons, with support, with necessary voting, because you remember that is still a very popular anecdote in Ukraine with Orban and his coffee that costed 10 billion euros during the vote for the start of the negotiation of accession procedure for Ukraine. So basically, let us brew some more coffee for Ukraine, for European populists. Maybe it will work.
Oleksandr, we're kind of nearing the end of our time, and I wanted to just while we're wrapping up, I wanted to kind of ask if there's anything you wanted to communicate to us. I think that the real question I have, which is, and I wonder about this every time I interact with Ukrainian academics like yourself, is there anything that we can do from Western Europe, from within Ireland, in terms of, is there something that you need from us? Is there something that we can do to support?
There are a lot of things, but basically, I think you're doing the right thing just by communicating and asking this question. Because, for example, if I will answer this question as an academic, as a representative of Naukma, I'll say about student exchanges, I'll say about common lectures, I'll say about some projects, I will say about inviting your professionals and your academics here just to get a touch of the situation. If I speak from a position of political consultant, of political analyst, I will speak about the things that we were speaking about for the last hour, about the peace process. I will speak about the financial support. I will speak about the military support. So there are a lot of issues, but it all starts at the point when you ask a very direct and specific question. What specifically in this regard, in this position, I can do? Because unfortunately, even within Central Europe, even within countries close to Russia, I see less and less of this question being asked. And unfortunately, sometimes it's just because some of our partners are not interested. Some of our partners, they think they knew better than us. Some of our partners are just trying to stay away from the fire, not to get burned. But the main thing here is just to ask what is necessary at the given situation, for the given moment, for the given person or for the given organization. And the second one, just to be proactive and to be, as I said, if you call yourself coalition of the willing, be the coalition and be the willing. So make it a frontal, not frontal assault, but frontal endeavor. Make it as big and as encompassing as possible. and be willing to go along with it, not just to declare, but not just to talk the talk, but walk the walk. So basically, be Ukrainian in that approach. That's all I can say. But generally speaking, just a short comment. I'm very glad. I'm not surprised, but I'm astonished to very positive and profound feedback from you guys and from the depthness of your questions and from your involvement in the process. Because for me, it was not just talking in general issues like this is bad, this is good, this is black, and this is white. Oh, you see the situation. It was a very thoughtful discussion, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity. So, by the way, the more such discussions can take place, and such exchanges and everything, the better the situation will be in a strategic perspective. Because I do believe that we, I mean, me and you, our generation, will be conducting the negotiation for a session, will be conducting the negotiation of the proper peace deal, will be conducting negotiation of the new world order. So basically, let us prepare for this.
Well, Oleksandr, I just wanted to say thank you so much, not just for coming and talking to us, because I think it's, we have speakers that come and talk to us. You're an academic yourself, you know this, that we have guest speakers, but doing the work that you're doing in the most adverse conditions with, limited electricity supplies, all of the challenges that you're facing. We just want to say thank you so much. And for all of your positivity throughout this and your frankness, it really, I can't say thank you enough, just for not only just for taking the time to be with us today, albeit virtually, but also for your continued work. And hopefully, and we are working on getting you over to Ireland in the near future. But